Welcome to your ultimate starting point for Manchester City news. Here you'll find everything that truly matters about the club. Behind-the-scenes updates, boardroom decisions, training developments, an analysis of the squad's current moment, and, of course, the hottest movements in the transfer market. No waffle, no noise, and with the context you need to understand what's happening now and what could blow up in the next few hours. If you want to follow City with fast, clear information and that perspective of someone who lives the club every single day, this is your place. So leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we don't miss any important news here. Let's begin. The mood is one of maximum alert, but also a certain relief, because Pep Guardiola decided to speak very directly about Rodri'S situation. And when the subject is the engine of the midfield, the player who gives order, rhythm, and security to the entire team, every detail becomes a reason for anxiety. The difference between a dominant City and a City that has to reinvent itself, match after match, runs heavily through him, and the fans know that. The main news is simple and huge at the same time. There has been no setback. Rodri remains on the planned route to return. The hamstring injury, suffered in October, is delicate because it involves a tendon area that demands extra care, and that care has context. After the serious knee problem in 2024, the club changed its risk threshold with him. It's not just about returning, it's about returning the right way, without turning urgency into a nightmare. Pep said this after a 3-0 victory over Sunderland, a match in which City showed control, efficiency, and that feeling that the team didn't need to force things to get it done. Ruben Dias, Josko Gvardiol, and Phil Foden were decisive to secure the result and keep the team glued to the top, cutting the gap to Arsenal. This kind of win lets the environment breathe, but it also highlights how much Rodri is still missed in the fully functioning machine. When asked directly about a possible regression in the recovery, the answer was no. Pep's message was didactic and at the same time emotional. He made it clear that a slower step doesn't mean a step backwards. It means an intelligent step. City are treating Rodri's return almost like a gradual re-entry in pre-season mode, with controlled loads, carefully measured training volume, and no risk of placing the responsibility of a heavy schedule on his shoulders too soon. And that's where the part that really stirs the fans comes in, because the calendar doesn't forgive. When the Premier League battle tightens and a big Champions League clash appears on the horizon, the temptation to speed everything up is enormous. But Pep, speaking about Rodri, seemed more concerned with tomorrow than with the noise of right now. He acknowledged the obvious. Playing without an athlete of that level is tough. More than tough, it's strategic. This was the player who anchored the treble-winning side, one of the most dominant names in recent football, capable of transforming the collective behavior even when he isn't directly involved in every touch. Pep practically described a reality supporters feel in their bones. Rodri's mere presence changes the team's emotional state. City start playing with more calm, more organization, and more conviction. He's the kind of athlete who doesn't need to make the whole match sparkle for the collective to rise. That explains the dilemma. Bringing him back too early could cost more weeks without him, and losing Rodri for longer, especially in this decisive period, is a risk the manager does not want to take. So the message is clear. Careful reintegration, no shortcuts. The realistic expectation is that he will move closer to the group in the coming weeks, but with the awareness that being available is not the same as being ready for 90 minutes in sequence. The return should be progressive, with City managing matches and situations without pushing the player's physical limit. The goal isn't just to have him back, it's to have him whole. This point matters because it speaks directly to the club's moment. The feeling is that City are living an aggressive transition phase in which the squad is already being shaped for a new cycle, even while competing right at the top. And that takes us to the second strong movement behind the scenes: early preparation for the 2026 window. Reports indicate the club is already working with a list of 5 names who could be placed on the market in the summer of 2026. And that detail doesn't appear out of nowhere. Since the change in sporting leadership and after a 2024-25 season below expected standards, the board started a deep overhaul. There were arrivals, departures, and strategic loans. Big names left the club permanently, others went out to gain minutes, and the squad went through a reorganization that, however noisy it was, seems to have restored competitiveness to the team. One striking detail is how City managed to regroup even after a turbulent start, having been in the bottom half of the table by the end of August and still putting themselves back in the title race. The short distance to Arsenal shows the project hasn't lost strength, but it also indicates where the team still needs adjustments, especially when injuries and defensive fluctuations come into play. The projection for 2026 seems to follow the logic of continuing this renewal. The club aren't acting like they're reacting in panic. They're acting like they already understand that the peak of a cycle demands unpopular decisions to make room for the next one. And within that logic, loaned players and young talents whose trajectories still haven't clicked as expected could enter the sales radar more strongly. The most talked about case on this list is Jack Grealish, with a contract structure that could allow a purchase for figures that still depend on negotiation. The idea that the final value can vary shows how these talks are linked to performance, the market and minutes planning, also with an eye on the international calendar approaching. Alongside him, other loaned players or those in early career phases may be assessed by the club through a pragmatic lens. Sell with protection, include smart clauses, and maintain a margin of control in case of a future breakout. That is typical of management trying to balance the now with what comes next. City still want to win everything this season, but they're already preparing the next board. And when a club of this size thinks 2 summers ahead, the message is that no one is untouchable outside the absolutely essential core. What makes this scenario even more interesting is that even with this advanced sales planning, City are also looking at the market with that classic hunger of a side that wants to raise the ceiling of the squad. And there's a specific concern that stands out: pure, aggressive speed out wide. The team have creativity. They have talent for short combinations. They have players who drift inside and create technical superiority in tight spaces. But the sense is that there's a missing profile that attacks the space behind the defense with constant explosion, especially on the right, in the style of a winger who scares opponents simply by accelerating and eating up ground. That kind of threat changes the opponent's behavior, pushes the last line backwards, and opens space around Holland. It's in that gap that interest emerges in a young RB Leipzig player described as a high-potential speedster with strong numbers for his age. The competition would be fierce, with other English giants monitoring closely, and the quoted price sits around 87 million if the race truly heats up. The sporting argument behind this interest is easy to understand. When you compare profiles, it becomes clear that many of City's current names offer control, technique, and reading of the game, but not necessarily that terror of depth that dismantles a defensive line in 2 or 3 bursts. A winger with brutal acceleration changes the repertoire, changes the opponent's plan, and gives the manager a weapon the squad doesn't have in abundance right now. The young target also carries signs of real production: goals, constant dribbling, the ability to finish with both feet, and the most valuable trait for a team that likes to control matches in the opponent's half, which is the courage to be direct when the situation demands it. In the right context, a player with that energy can be more than a promise. He can be the new element that rejuvenates the attacking dynamic. In the end, the sum of these 3 fronts reveals a City in a state of total alert. Rodri'S recovery is being treated as an absolute long-term priority. The 2026 sales planning reinforces that the rebuild isn't over, and the search for speed shows the team want to add a characteristic that could make a specific difference in big matches and in moments of hard tactical locks. If you look calmly, all of this points in the same direction. City aren't just surviving a transition phase. They're trying to turn this phase into a new competitive advantage, with cold decisions off the pitch and very careful choices on it. And that brings in a detail many people underestimate when talking about Rodri'S' absence. It's not only what he does on the ball, it's what he allows everyone around him to do. Without him, City need more safety passes, more double cover, more emotional control to avoid splitting in 2 when the opponent finds a quick transition. With him, The team seemed to play with a map of the match already drawn before the ball even rolled. That's why Pep's words were so relevant, because they didn't sound like standard press conference talk. They sounded like someone who knows he's dealing with a rare piece. And when he stresses that there has been no setback, the message to supporters is almost a request for strategic patience. City don't just want to recover an athlete. They want to recover the entire stability mechanism that this athlete represents. The concern with the hamstrings is not a small detail either. Injuries in that area can be tricky in players with a high-volume physical role like his. Rodri isn't a midfielder who appears in isolated moments. He's involved in everything, shielding the back line, first passes, switching play, controlling tempo, covering fullbacks, reading second balls. That means returning too early doesn't just put the player at risk, it can compromise the entire game model. And this is where the decision to treat him with a near-mini preseason process makes sense. City know the calendar will try to push the team into emotional decisions. And last season, European football as a whole saw how rushing can wreck months of planning. So the posture now appears to be maximum protection. The interesting thing is that, even without Rodri at full match capacity, City have found ways to stay alive in the race. That doesn't erase the absence, but it shows the squad are trying to absorb it within a collective logic. The team reorganized. Some players stepped up, and the gap to Arsenal shrank. That kind of response doesn't happen by accident. At the same time, no one inside the club seems fooled by the idea that this scenario is sustainable forever without adjustments. Hence the importance of looking at what's being built off the pitch. And the move to prepare a list of potential sales for 2026 is proof that the board are trying to avoid the old mistake many giants make, waiting for the squad to age together and then chasing the damage in a single window. When a club plans 2 summers in advance, it is acknowledging that future success depends on courage in the present, and that includes difficult decisions involving players who have already had important moments in the shirt. But the top-level machine doesn't accept sentimentality as the main planning criterion. The context of this reorganization is clear. After the trophyless 2024-25 campaign, the club had to move pieces that once seemed untouchable. Big names left, reinforcements arrived, and some players were loaned out to gain rhythm and market value ahead of a decisive international cycle. The objective isn't only to sell. It's to sell at the right time, for the right price, with the right fit to open space for new roles. And when we talk about smart sales, the key word is protection. If a young player still hasn't fitted as expected or hasn't had enough continuity to show his potential, City tend to adopt a strategy that preserves the chance of a future return. Buyback clauses and bonus mechanisms are tools to avoid the club losing a jewel too late due to an early assessment. That points to a modern management philosophy that tries to balance immediate performance with the future value of the sporting asset. It isn't just football, it's project engineering. And the more competitive the market becomes, the more this engineering turns into a decisive advantage. But City aren't only looking at exits, they're looking at the type of arrival that could raise the team's repertoire in a very specific area. And that's where the conversation about speed gains even more strength. Because on paper, the squad have players capable of creating, dribbling in tight spaces, swapping positions, and controlling matches with patience. But elite football isn't made only of control. It is made of contrast. And the most lethal contrast against well-organized teams is having a player who, in a single second, turns a safe, wide possession into a vertical attack without warning. A truly explosive winger changes the geometry of the pitch. The opponent drop a few meters simply out of fear. Fullbacks hesitate to push on. Center-backs start defending with their bodies turned backwards. The opposing midfield become more concerned with covering space than pressing the build-up. And for a team that likes to dominate territory, that is gold. That's why the idea of investing heavily in a profile like this doesn't seem like a whim. It seems like a course correction. Since the departure of a winger who offered that constant depth threat, City have relied more on patient construction, more on internal triangles, and more on associative talent to break down blocks. It works, of course, but on some European nights, when the match becomes chess, A piece of absolute speed can break the entire logic. The name that emerges in this scenario comes with impressive numbers for his age, and with the characteristics City seem most to be seeking today: aggressive use of space. He isn't just fast for the sake of being fast. He's fast with intention. He's the type of player who receives and immediately thinks about attacking the space between fullback and center back, or about dragging a marker to open the lane for inside runners. And when half of the Premier League appear on the radar for a player like that, it isn't a coincidence. It's the market recognizing a rare profile. The high price is a direct consequence of that scarcity, because speed combined with real production is a difficult combination to find in a young player, especially in leagues that value physical intensity and transition like the German one. In this respect, City seem to be facing a typical elite project decision. Act early and try to beat the competition in January, or wait for the summer while risking the value inflating even more. Competitive logic suggests urgency, but financial logic and squad management demand careful evaluation. This kind of collision of priorities is where major football departments show whether they are truly top class. And all of this connects back to Rodri in a way that can go unnoticed, because a team that is faster out wide also protects the midfield. When the opponent know they can be punished in quick transitions and direct attacks, they think twice before pushing their lines up. That eases pressure through the central corridor and reduces the volume of sustained attacks against a side that, at times, is still adjusting its structure without its main holding midfielder operating at full function. In the end, the puzzle pieces start to make sense together. Rodri'S cautious recovery is not a sign of fragility. It's a sign of priority. The list of possible sales for 2026 is not a sign of abandoning the project. It's a sign of tough, necessary planning. And the search for elite speed is not only a desire for attacking sparkle, it's a clear attempt to expand the ways to win. City seem to be living a moment in which every decision has two layers: the layer of this week's match and the layer of the multi-year cycle. And it's at this intersection that great teams reinvent themselves without losing their hunger for titles. Whether this plan will materialize in the ideal way is another conversation. But what you can already sense is a club mentality that doesn't wait for crisis to knock before acting. And this season, with the fight at the top tight and huge challenges on the horizon, that mentality could be the difference between a good campaign and a historic one, despite the turbulence. If this overview helped you understand better what's behind the headlines and why these three fronts matter so much for the immediate future and for the project's long-term direction, leave a like and subscribe to keep following everything closely.